Josh here. Yeah, I want to talk about a ban list. This is early thoughts, just my thoughts. So for those of you who are just going to click out because you're crazy to even be talking about this, that's fine. These are just thoughts. Now that Eric's Curiosa is planning on store championships and regional championships and national championships, I think this is a conversation we need to have. Not saying it needs to be implemented right away. I think that 2025, as a year, we should kind of let it settle. See how the championships work out. But once we do that, once we start really looking at these competitive events and assuming they're large and robust and that we're seeing certain patterns, we may need to consider a ban list for these high-level competitive play events. Again, I'm not saying that your local constructed event that hosts 16 players at your local store should do this. But for high-level events, I think that there certainly could be, now or in the future, cards that may need to be removed from those formats. That's just my feeling. Now, certainly, the one good thing is, I don't think there are a lot of cards that would even meet this criteria. The fantastic thing about Sorcery is that I have seen so many unbeatable decks come and go that it seems clear to me that there has to be a very consistent, long-term pattern for a card to be considered banned or some other mitigating factor. And I'm going to talk about that with one of the cards I think might be bannable. So, we've seen Death Speaker. It's unbeatable. We've seen Fury Road. It's unbeatable. We've seen Geomancer Roots. It's unbeatable. And they've all went to the wayside. In some cases, they've continued to exist. They've continued to jump into the meta and shake it up a little bit. And I think that's fantastic. But that is the strength of Sorcery. It's very robust in terms of the type of deck that you can run at competitive events. And because of that, I think that that would keep a ban list of any kind pretty minimal. So, let's just get into the cards that I think might in the future warrant a ban. Yes, my first card is Chaos Twister. Now, for those of you out there who are like, well, it's a good card, but it's not broken, that's true. That is not why Chaos Twister is on this list. The reason Chaos Twister is on this list is because of its dexterity requirement. This is a very difficult thing to handle, especially from a judge's perspective. If these high-level events are going to have prizes that are considerable, they may have very specific rules about how Chaos Twister is played. For example, with Chaos Twister at some events that I have participated in, you had to have a ruler 12 inches from the table. You got a single blow. You couldn't move your hand. That is a lot to ask a judge to monitor and make a call on. It's not something that's cut and dry. It's something that you have to make judgment of, well, are they just a person that kind of has a tremble? Or was it intentional that they kind of dropped it a little? That's a very, very difficult thing for a judge to actually assess. And I don't think it's fair to judges to ask them to do that. So at high level play, regional championship, store championship, national championship, I think Chaos Twister should be banned. There's just no reason to put that on a judge and the potential disruption that it could have on a high-level event, especially if there aren't any guidelines. Now let's think about that. There's no guidelines, just play it as you see it. They don't call a judge over. Person does their thing, right? And they drop their hand, and then the other player gets upset. They're like, they dropped their hand. They dropped the card right where they wanted it. They didn't blow. You're in a mess. And that is why, in my personal opinion, Chaos Twister should be banned from high-level events. That's right. The best card in Sorcery right now, according to many competitive players. Ring of Morrigan. Banned. Now, again, I'm not saying we do this right away, but there are a lot of issues with Ring of Morrigan, and as the game develops, it can become very problematic, and in fact, may already be problematic. So, we have this card that not every, but many competitive players say should be in every single deck. There is no reason not to play it. Philosopher's Stone used to be that way, but we've seen decks like Fury Road come along, proving that you don't need Philosopher's Stone. Great. But Ring of Morrigan, I think, is going to be a different situation. I think in high-level competitive play, everyone is going to be running a Ring of Morrigan. And that is the problem. To me, that is something that is a bannable thing. That a card is so powerful that every deck runs it. There's no reason not to run it. It's just too powerful. So, if that's the case, shouldn't we ban it? There are lots of other powerful cards, but most of those cards are limited by their thresholds. Ring of Morrigan does not have that. Any deck can include it. And worse, it only costs 1 mana to put into play, which means it can be brought into play with Highland Princess. So now you have a unique that in this highly variable game you're not really supposed to be able to get to. You have a way to tutor for it. If you're real crazy, you can play Eric's Curiosa and go get it that way. But that's kind of an outlier. But still, you have Highland Princess. In addition, you have cards like Browse. You have cards like Kelp Cavern. You have cards like Observatory. Ways to sort to get to the card that you need. And you may all say, still, 50-card deck, and if we get 60-card decks with Gothic, I don't see it. I'm going to have to disagree. And I'm going to have to disagree because of a deck that CJ made. Now, for those of you who don't know CJ, he has a channel called OldFashionedNerds. He is one of the best players in Sorcery right now. He's been at many big events. He won the first Courtesan Cup. Great player, fantastic guy. And in the most recent Tabletop Simulator League, he ran a deck focused on getting Ring of Morrigan, replicating it, using it over and over, scavenging fiends to get it out, ways to just get to the card. That was what he did. And in his 6 league games, focusing on getting Ring of Morrigan, he averaged 30 life gained. That's insane. He created, in those 6 league games, 15 Rings of Morrigan. What? Now, he has said this deck is not unbeatable. In fact, he lost his last league game. Go watch the video. I've linked it in the description below. He gives a full breakdown of this thing, how to use it. It's a very cool deck. Wonderful thing. And the best news is, CJ is going out there to find ways to actually beat it and make a new deck that counters the thing. And he's already got several planned. Go watch the video. Very cool. Very interesting to watch. I'm sure it's great to play. But now we have a deck based around Ring of Morrigan that is winning a lot. Granted, it's being played by one of the best players in the game right now, but still, here we have Ring of Morrigan, and then if we have this deck, and there are other decks that start to replicate that, or even come close to it, doing similar things, creating more rings, if we end up in a place where a lot of decks in the meta of these championships are focusing on Ring of Morrigan, creating more, that's a problem, I think. In addition, just the fact that every deck's going to have it. If we are seeing Ring of Morrigan in, 90% of decks in these championship games, and let's say 90% of decks in the top 16. 90% of decks in the top 16 have Ring of Morrigan. I think that's a problem. And it's just because Ring of Morrigan, I think, needs some changes, which is why I think maybe it would have to be banned. Again, give it a year. Let's see. But I can definitely see a place where Ring of Morrigan would end up being a card that has to be banned because it's in every deck and because it's just fantastic. And it's easy. It can be tutored. There's just so many problems with how good the card is and the fact that it's probably going to be played in almost every competitive deck, even decks that don't focus on utilizing it a great deal. That's problematic. We should never be in a place where cards are like that and they can have such a huge impact on if you win or lose the game or not. And it seems to me that Ring of Morrigan is in that place. So that's it. 2 cards. Again, not a huge list. There are other cards I did think about. I considered Valley of Delight. But honestly, even though Valley of Delight could end up being a card that's in almost every deck, there are going to be single threshold decks it won't be used in. And in addition, the benefit of Valley of Delight is that it can actually allow us to create more diverse decks because it allows for so much threshold smoothing. So Valley of Delight to me is actually a very positive card on the potential number of decks, the diversity that we could have in those decks. So it's not a card I would consider banning. Another card that appears in many, many decks, Mirror Realm. Again, even with it being in many, many decks, it doesn't really have a game-winning type condition. It doesn't seem to affect play in the way that a card like Ring of Morrigan does. So I wouldn't think Mirror Realm would be something that would go on that list. Now, one card that I might put on a watch list of some kind is Candlemoss Monks. Of all the cards in the game, Candlemoss Monks is the one that it just bothers me. It scares me because it has to be considered with every single card that's made in the future. Will any future card allow Candlemoss Monks to be abused? And decks have already been made with it, where there are ways to make it so that you effectively take away all of your opponent's turns. They're very combo specific, require a lot of work and effort to actually make work. So those decks haven't permeated the game to the point, especially at high level events, where we're seeing Candlemoss Monks basically ruining everyone's day. But because of what the card does, it's just something that I always have in the back of my mind. And certainly if Eric's Curiosa is not very careful with every future card designed, I can certainly see Candlemoss Monks ending up on a ban list. But that's it for today. Are there any cards that I missed? If there are, drop them in the comments. I'll be happy to comment about those. I don't think that there are really any cards that would meet the level of banning other than the 2, or the level to be banned, other than the 2 that I mentioned. I know some of you may throw some other ones out, Morgana, but again, cards that are threshold limited, especially a card like Morgana with 3 threshold, I don't feel that those will ever really reach the level of being something that would be banned. Now, a card that something that has threshold but only 1 threshold and people make an effort to get that 1 threshold to include it, that would be something. But I can't think of any cards right now that really meet that criteria. So, just the 2 cards. Any more that you think of? Drop them in the comments. And as always, keep on contesting the realm.